Hello, everyone. Today is September 25th, and we're on the Huddlecast, and we have special guest Oriol Pont, or how do you pronounce it?
Right, that's correct.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you. Oriol and I met on some Telegram groups, the Ethereum plus Coin Dojo, and I've always really enjoyed his input. It's in those chats, it's some very more technical people than myself, and I always learn a lot when I see you typing, messages with other people. And sort of recently, you were talking with Dr. Raw Old Dirty on there about the sort of the origin of the Satoshi mining. So I was hoping that would be kind of our topic today. But first of all, maybe you could just give everyone like a little bit of background of who you are, what you do for a career. I think you have a pretty impressive, career outside of Bitcoin, and then maybe how you got into Bitcoin and got so involved.
Also, so me, I'm a researcher and I'm a physicist, which in principle is not directly related with that. But anyway, I have worked a lot on some type of physical problems that systems that are the way they interact. They're what we call complex systems, which typically they have some sort of interactions that lead to chaos. For example, to explosions or some nonlinear interaction between them, so which make just non-trivial to solve them. That's what's called complex. And one of the applications of this is what's called econophysics, which is trying to find a link to economy and economical subjects from laws typically used in physics and in physical systems.
Oh, wow.
And that's basically that how I got some interest in that. Other than that, it's true that Bitcoin is normally more studied by cryptographers or also computer scientists that have an interest in distributed systems. These are subjects that I don't have a particular expertise in them. I just have read a bit about them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but bringing the physics and economics together probably adds a really unique viewpoint for this kind of thing. What does the physics of Bitcoin look like? Like, how does that work from a system side?
Because it's like an autonomous system. The issuance policy, the economical policy at the high level is all controlled by math itself, by the process itself. It's not interfered by human decisions. So I think that in that sense, it's very interesting from point of view of physics, which has sometimes some problems when trying to modelize what's human behavior, human decision, and human interaction. In that sense, that it's more autonomous. It's a good thing. It makes some things easier. But there's some research starting now in the econophysics approach to cryptocurrency, but it's not quite well developed yet. It's studied mostly from the point of view of markets, exchange rate, but not from the peer-to-peer network itself.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that'll be interesting. How many people are studying that around the world?
It's small. It's still small. Mm-hmm. And I'm not directly involved in that yet. Just have some interest in that.
Oh, excellent. Well, I guess that kind of, what you were saying about the autonomous or anonymous kind of segues it into Satoshi. So can you give us, I mean, I think most people listening, and there's not that many usually, but they have somewhat of an idea of, Satoshi being the anonymous creator of Bitcoin. He wrote the white paper, came up with a lot of the ideas, or do you think it was one person or a group of people, or what's your kind of thoughts on that?
About Satoshi?
Yes, yeah.
Do you mean, but in the fact of being anonymous?
Right, yeah.
Yes. It's I don't have a particular knowledge of that, and it's probably if his anonymous is part of his decision and part of what he thought was important. Personally, one of the points of using a pseudonymous identity for doing something like that is that then the focus is in the invention, not in the inventor. Mm-hmm. So in something like Bitcoin, which is decentralized, which it's autonomous, fully peer-to-peer, which means peer-to-peer, but peer-to-peer without master nodes or without privileged servers. It's quite important that the focus is in the decentralized attribute of the invention, and the person who invented it is not that important. Mm-hmm. So it's related to that, but it's mostly speculation.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I wonder often if we knew who Satoshi was, would this thing have even gotten off the ground like it did, or would the government have tried to shut it down, or would people just have trust in him, so it wouldn't have created that trustless environment that is so key to the whole thing? And would it even be able to be considered decentralized if everyone knew who the central actor that started it was? And I wonder, like, from the SEC's perspective, they could call it a security because they could say that it's, a centralized entity that people are buying with the expectation of profit in the future. So I think it was very important that he or they stayed anonymous in this. And then also, with the value of those, I think it's around 1 million Bitcoin that are thought to be in Satoshi's wallet. If people knew where to find Satoshi, I wonder if they'd try and go steal it, or at least there would be a risk of that as the price increases over time. So, and it just makes it it's sort of part of the allure of Bitcoin. I think it just adds another layer of the story that makes it more interesting that there's this anonymous founder. Do you think he'll ever be discovered? I think I was reading that the last, online footprint he left was in 2011, and since then he's been a ghost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know. I have little bit. One thing that I know that I have because I'm in a computer research institute. Have some colleagues that work in artificial intelligence, and some of them they work on text analysis and author analysis, and it's really a field that's evolving quite quickly. And on the other hand, it's true that Satoshi, he wrote a lot of posts, a lot of emails that are kept from an analysis of this text. In principle, probably not today. In the future, it could be possible to analyze them with these expert systems, with these automatic systems that are being developed to identify and to know to which other identity those tags are related. So if the person who used that Satoshi name has written other things, which is quite probable, should be possible probably in the future to use him from that perspective. I think that's not something that it's certainly not possible today, but something that could be possible in the future.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that would be interesting. I was reading one thing that said a lot of his dialect on some of the online stuff was very much, they thought he was British. Like he would use the word bloody in front of things. Like, I don't know if it was bloody hell or what it was, but they thought, and based on some of the time zones, I mean, it's hard to know, if he could be sleeping and awake at different times, but they thought it was that he was in the North American hemisphere.
Yeah.
And so you and Dr. Ra were going over Sergio Demian Lerner's work, which had some graphs that kind of pointed to the fact that in the 2009 mining days, it was just Satoshi, and it looked, well, I think the original work was in 2013, and it was looking like Satoshi did most of the mining, if that was true. And then they talked about the privacy created by these extra nonces rather than the incremental ones, and they thought that it was a single miner that created all of those blocks in 2009. What do you agree with that, or?
Well, so it's quite polemical. Quite political conclusion, basically because some of the people who were involved in 2009, they described something different than what was found later and what was found in the blockchain, which is that there are some these progression lines of the externals these triangular patterns that indicate that the most likely explanation of that is that at least for the first months of 2009, there was a principal miner mining most of the blocks. Not all of them, but like nearly 2/3 of them. And this contrasted a lot with what some of the early posters in Bitcoin thought. For example, Gregory Maxwell or deathandtaxes. Users of deathandtaxes have commented that they remember that there was a lot of competition already in the early days, already in 2009. But the evidence that we have in the blockchain, it seems to contradict that, at least for the first half of 2009. So what is that external thing? I will try to explain it in a simple way. Basically, the principle of the creation of a block mining, the proof of work, is based in what's called a hash function. A hash function is a function that takes some input, gets some output, and from the input, it's straightforward to know the output. It's easy operation. But from knowing the output, it's very difficult to know what's the input. It's basically impossible. The only way to derive the input from the output is just to try to brute force one by one all the possible inputs until you would find the output. And if the input space is very big, it's basically impossible. So that's the hashing function. That's how it works. It has also another property, which is that it's unbiased. And this means that if you take an input and you iterate it. You have the following number and the two numbers, 3, 4 added to that. The output will be uniformly distributed between 0 and a maximum. And the interesting part of that is that it can be used from something that's the deterministic function, from an input you get an output. You can try to make something that's probabilistic, which is a distribution. For example, the output are from 0 to a maximum. If now I take half that maximum, this will roughly happen half of the times for half the inputs only. If I divide the maximum by 10, it will happen once in every of 10 inputs will fit this condition. If I divide it by 1 million, I will have something that happens only for 1 in a million inputs. So that's what's called the difficulty. The difficulty is basically the number for which we divide the maximum number of the output to select a certain share of inputs that would fit that. I don't know if it's almost like it's basically how many hashes will be needed to obtain that output that fits this condition.
Okay.
The maximum value divided by 1 million will be fit typically just by 1 in a million inputs. So a miner that wants to find a block will have to try 1 million times on average until he finds the matching block that fits that difficulty condition.
Oh, thank you. A little light bulb went off for me on how that, how that algorithm of finding the blocks kind of works. So thank you.
Proof of work. So now, how does it work? How does it's put all together? It's put in the block. There is the header of the block, and beneath there is a reference to the previous block. This is how the blocks are chained in a blockchain. Mm-hmm. There is also reference to the rest of the transactions that will be in the block. There are other things like the timestamp. And then there is one number that's called a nonce. A nonce is just an iterator, a number that's tried, increasing it one by one, just to have more tries to fit that difficulty requirement, that difficulty condition. So that's the nonce. In Bitcoin, the way it's done, it was in the beginning it was all optimized for 32-bit computers. In I think it's until 2010 all the builds, the releases of Bitcoin were 32-bit only. And if you wanted to optimize for 32 bits, the values, the variables, the types of those variables were 4 bytes only. And there is an issue with that, is that these 4 bytes, when you try to hash a lot, 4 bytes, it's just a few billion, and it's relatively quickly exhausted. Maybe even in the early days at difficulty 1, in a few minutes you could exhaust that nonce space. And if that nonce in the header gets exhausted, you need to introduce new variability and new counter in another part of the header in order to have new tries for finding a block that matches the difficulty. And that was done in the extra nonce. The extra nonce is part of the first transaction in every block. That's called the Coinbase transaction. It's a very special transaction that that creates new coins. So as it's newly created coin, it doesn't have an input. Most transactions in Bitcoin, they have the input part and the output part, but Coinbase transaction only has the output. The input part can be filled with random data. And in that case, the extra nonce is a variable that can be put in that input part of the first transaction in the block. And like this, even if the nonce in the header is only 4 bytes, you can have 4 more bytes in the Coinbase or even more. And from that, you get the extra variability needed for mining. So what happens with that? That extra nonce, it starts with 0, then it's 1, 2, 3, it's incremental when the Bitcoin node is started, when Bitcoin miner is started.
How high? It probably doesn't matter, but how high does it go up to like 9, or does it keep going past 9? Like, does it go into double, triple digits, the nonce increasing, or?
Yes, it can increase a lot.
Okay.
Yes, thousands, yes, easily. And
does the computer just do that? That's what the Satoshi code does? Like, it just moves that nonce number up automatically till it cracks it?
What if?
So is that what the code does? Like, when you're mining, it would just start, like, so it would have a set number and then it would just increase that nonce number until it finds the block?
Yes, it's both of them. It's the base nonce and the extra nonce that are increased. Just that when you have cycled around all the basic nonce, you have done this billion hashes, which is relatively quick, even more today, of course. Then it starts changing also the extra nonce, which is 4 bytes more. It's billion more, and billion times billions makes enough, sufficiently enough. But not with just one of them. So the way it was coded, this variable, this extra nonce, it started every time it started the mining, it started from 0, and then every time it found a block, it had that value, but it kept increasing later. So like this, it's possible by looking at the extra nonce of every block, because all of that is public. You can have an idea of when that the miner that has published that block had started, because it keeps increasing.
Oh, so you can work it backwards, like to whatever that nonce number was. You know how quickly each new number was generated, so you can figure out what time they started the search for that block. Or
what do you mean?
It's probably a silly question. I was saying maybe from the time that you know the number of the nonce at the time the block is found, so maybe you can calculate the time backwards of how that number was created. Is that how you would know the time?
Well, yeah, you can have some estimate of the hashing rate from that.
Okay.
Yes, if it's possible. It's not an accurate estimate, but yes, but some estimate it should be possible to have it from that. Yes. Okay. So what we observe there in what you've shown is that at least from January to August 2009, there is that quite clear pattern that suggests that there was indeed some. I mean, that there are possible explanations, but the easiest, the simplest one is that there was a principal miner solving most of the blocks. Mm-hmm. And then, well, was that Satoshi? We don't know. It's basically a speculation, a further speculation, but it's if you ask who else could be cherishing that early Bitcoin network in 2009, it's likely that it was the creator, Satoshi, who was doing that. There is also another evidence that we know that Satoshi sent some transaction to Hal Finney, and that transaction came from one of the blocks that was on one of these main progressions. So from that, it's also another element of evidence that could be used to try to associate that entity that solved most of the blocks to Satoshi. But anyway, it's just something derived from patterns. It's not a very specific proof.
But if it's thought that Satoshi has 1 million Bitcoins in a wallet, so is it possible to see like where those were generated from?
I don't think so. No.
Okay.
They haven't moved in nearly 10 years, so. But they are simply lost. Could be. Yeah, they are lost. Or maybe they are not lost, but they are, in practice, they are lost because Satoshi doesn't want to move them ever. It's possible too. There's something that I think is quite important, that when Satoshi released Bitcoin, he announced it in 2008, and he didn't launch until early 2009, January 2009. So basically, the code was ready in 2008, but he didn't start immediately. It's possible that in IRC, I'm not aware that there are lots of IRC chat available, but I think it's quite likely that there was some discussion about launching Bitcoin in IRC, and from that it's possible that it got more or less coordinated to launch. That this explains how Finney, for example, he says he made one of the earliest blocks that was just like 2 days after launch. So he was aware, he was paying attention at the launch of Bitcoin. So it seems that Satoshi wanted really to have multiple people involved, aware already from the beginning.
In that article you sent me that Hal Finney had wrote, he said that he started mining it and it was working, and he was communicating with Satoshi about various bugs that they were finding in the system, but then it was too noisy and he turned it off. He probably really wished afterwards, and Satoshi probably, like you just said, wanting a network effect, would have liked him to keep going with it too, probably. But
yeah, back then Bitcoin was probably just a silly experiment, just something that's unimportant. And this explains that even someone who had worked in early cryptocurrency like Hal Finney, he was very interested in that subject, which at that time was very few people in the world that worked in that. Even him, who was already interested in that subject, he just run the mining for a few days. So I think this explains a little bit what also these other early miners could have done. They could maybe have run the system for a few days only, and then stop it. And it supports also that if there is continuous mining, because for most of 2009 there are blocks keep appearing almost every day. The biggest gap is just 2 days without the block, and then they start appearing several blocks per day already again. It's quite probable that there was someone taking special care that there were years that were communication between those, and then there were blocks that kept appearing, even if there were very few transactions back then.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, it's even if in the end that early entity produced nearly 1 million bitcoins, it's possible that was all done just as a bootstrapping support for the network, and not really to have some production of coins to claim later.
Mm-hmm.
But well, anyway, all of this is basically something that I speculate. What we know is just what's recorded, which is this sort of pattern, which what progression that where one ends, then it falls to zero and the other one begins, which means that it was most likely the same person doing that, and also they tend to stop at the same height, which also indicates that it was not a relay between different miners, but the same one doing that.
Mm-hmm. And so my other question on that was, if it was possible to find that much information on the early miners, what about the miners today? Like, are they able to stay anonymous, or is it possible with all the, additional kind of surveillance that's popped up around Bitcoin? Can you find their IP addresses, or like how is all kinds of information known about the people mining now?
I think that going to change now, and now the exonomes it no longer works like that. It starts from one random number, so that this type of analysis is not no longer possible to do it like that. Anyway, the reality is that miners meaning what are miners today are block producers, not necessarily the ones doing the hashes, the hash functions calculations, but the ones that put the blocks together with their nonces and with all that. So they have those contributions from what would be the hashes, but basically the block production, the coin-based transaction. It has, in most cases, one part that identifies which was the mine, which was the pool operator that made that possible. And most of them, they are not anonymous. They are known players. They have certain big hash rate associated to them. There are many of them, and it's quite diverse, but they are not anonymous.
Okay, good to know. And what about so if Hal Finney wasn't, I always kind of thought maybe there was a group of them or whatnot, but then digging into this a little, it looks like it was obviously two different people, the way that Hal wrote that, saying, he was contacted by Satoshi and thought Satoshi was, a very intelligent person just based on the writing. And so, maybe they weren't a group together, but what about all of these claims by Craig Wright? Do you think there's any merit that he could have been the one doing these early minings?
It's quite unlikely, I think. It's because I know it's in some sense it's someone who has, from what we know, has been lying about having supercomputers that he did not have later.
Yeah, and it doesn't make sense.
Cryptographic proofs, which later don't match. Even some PGP, some encryption system keys that he provided were then shown that had been backdated. So there is a pattern of a lot of actions by that person that seem manipulative. So most likely is that he's trying to be manipulative with that claim. But even ignoring that, even ignoring all that, he hasn't provided any valid evidence either.
I think he's got something like 84 patents out on various blockchain technologies. So that even just that alone is, I think, it's a big contrast from putting this code out on an open source, fashion like it was, and remaining anonymous. So yeah. And then I was listening to a podcast earlier about Hal Finney, and it said that he was contacted by the CIA, and he let Satoshi know that he was going to be, meeting with them and I think explaining Bitcoin or something along those lines. And that was the end of the conversation with Satoshi. So who knows, but it's interesting. Yeah. Well, I'm certainly glad Satoshi created this stuff. It's been a fascinating thing to watch over the years.
Yes. Well, there's probably something important. I feel something important to say, that even if there was that main miner which was solving at least the early months of 2009, at least until around August 2009, solved like 2/3 of the blocks. Mm-hmm. The other third of the blocks was really solved by other miners, by the externals of this. They don't match in that solved pattern. So it's clearly some other clients that were solving blocks, and this happens since the beginning. So in that sense, I think that it's part of what Gregory Maxwell explains is also true, which is that there were already other miners involved in the beginning, just not as continuously and as insistently as that entity, which most likely was Satoshi.
Mm-hmm. Oh, excellent. They weren't as dedicated, but they were still there. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much, Oriol. I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate you explaining it to me. Hopefully some other people will learn as much as I did from the conversation. It really helped understand kind of what it looks like with those nonces, and explaining. When I was reading your chats on the Telegram, it was very enlightening, and then you clarified it more here. So thank you.
Well, thanks to you for inviting me.
Do you have anything you want to share, like your Twitter handle or anything like that? Okay. All right.
What you have asked?
Oh, I was asking, do you want to share your Twitter handle or a way for other people to follow you on social media?
Well, you can share maybe that of the Telegram group.
Okay, sure. All right.
Yes, I actually have some Twitter, but I don't use it really almost never. So I don't think it's very important.
Okay. Yeah, it can be a big time suck sometimes. All right. Well, thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks.
Very good. Thanks. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.